Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today's March 22nd, 2023, and let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? So the biggest news of this week is obviously Xi Jinping's visit to the Kremlin to meet with Putin. And so this is just a few days after Putin it was announced that the ICC put on warrants on Putin's arrest following the crimes that he has committed over the kidnapping of thousands of Ukrainian kids to Russia. But I think the biggest questions that most people have is that what this meeting will mean for the Ukrainian war against Russia, and is China going to fully commit to helping Russia in terms of providing them lethal aid? My personal opinion is that no, China will not be providing Russia what it needs in terms of military assistance in order to continue fighting this war. But China has obviously its interest in allowing or letting Russia still win this war. And what would be a victory for China? Well, it was very clearly displayed a couple of weeks ago with their 12-point peace plan, where they indicated that a ceasefire needs to be implemented. And so a ceasefire will only be beneficial for Russia, and it would be embarrassing for the West if that was to happen, in the sense that they already pulled in so much resources and military assistance into Ukraine only to allow Russia to get to keep the territories that he illegally occupied and annexed. It would be clear loss for the West in Ukraine. So China would be interested in this type of scenario where Russia gets to keep the annexed territories, would be vulnerable and would be severely dependent on China, which it already is. And you can see that in this meeting that they had, because according to this article, China's domination of Russia is complete. So Sam Green is a Russian specialist, and he mentioned that essentially the talks that they've had last couple of days have been incredibly one-sided, and that repeatedly offering Russian raw exports but little Chinese investment to Russia in return. And we've seen that yesterday they signed a petrol deal where technically Russia is going to be selling China oil for an incredible discount. And so Xi Jinping just came to get as much extraction out of Putin as possible for cheap discounts. And so Putin tells his people he's fighting for Russia's sovereignty, but in truth, he's mortgaged the Kremlin to Beijing. And that's exactly the case. So by default now, Russia became a vassal state of China. It's too weak, it's too vulnerable to be able to run by itself at this point. Whereas a couple years ago, you can make an argument that China and Russia saw each other eye to eye. Now you can see that Xi Jinping is looking down on Putin because he sees them as a power that is pretty much losing influence, right? They were, promised by Putin that Russia would win this war within less than a month in Ukraine. And look, we're 13 months in, and Putin still is unable, with his mediocre, or if not terrible, army to take Bakhmut. So I think that this only reiterates that China, its interests only lie in extracting as many resources for clear discounts from Russia as much as possible. And let's say worst case scenario, even if China was to fully commit to helping Russia with lethal weapons, I think the West made it very clear that, first of all, while the sanctions are going to come through to China, which would be devastating for a country, China, which has very high ambitions to become the top economic power on the planet, that would just blow it off, these types of ambitions. Not that it would not hurt the West, because it would hurt us, but it would be suicidal for China to go that way. But even if they were to commit, the West would be doubling down and provide 3 times as much weapons than China would provide to Russia. As we've seen, there's been news today that came out that USA, the United States, is going to be accelerating and speeding up the delivery of Abrams tanks. So overall, this is my analysis of the last couple of days, how Xi Jinping visited the Kremlin. It's a clear show of force for China in the sense that they are now dominating Russia, and Putin is 100% reliant on China for its survivability. Let me know what you guys think about my opinion on this topic. Now, the other thing that is very alarming for Russia and why Putin really wanted, China's assistance in terms of military aid is exactly this. In this picture, which has been geo-confirmed, now Russia is pulling T-55s and T-54s out of its stock. And it's pretty much indicating that it's running out of modern weapons, and it's running very low at this point. And so now they've resorted to using tanks that were produced back in 1945 or started production back in 1945, 1946. We're talking about like absolutely obsolete tanks, right, that are no match to even Leopard 1s, and Ukraine is going to be getting modern IFVs that could knock them out easily, right? The Bradleys and the CV90s will just absolutely destroy the T-55s and T-54s. So this is alarming for Russia, and I really doubt that China is committed to really providing Russia with more modern tanks. In my opinion, I don't think they're going to do that, for the reasons I stated previously. But you can, I don't see anyone that's pro-Russian or is advocating that Russia is going to win this war. Just they're playing 4D chess right now. I can see the argument behind it. Look what they're doing right now. They're pulling off some of the oldest tanks possible. I wouldn't be even surprised if, in a couple months, they're going to start pulling off T-34s that were in stock. It's absolutely ridiculous. And these are apparently T-54Bs, which are modernized T-54s. But either way, T-54 is no match to any tanks that has been made in the last 30, 40 years. And Ukraine's going to be getting Challenger 2s, Abrams, the Bradleys, the IFVs that I've mentioned previously. And these tanks are just going to obliterate everything that Russia currently has. It's a paper tiger at this point. And the only thing that keeps Russia together at this point is the manpower that they have and the incredible stockpiles of Cold Era and World War II era weapons that it has. I wouldn't be surprised if Russia has thousands of these tanks in its stocks, but how many of them are functional, how many of them can actually do an impact in the war, it remains to be seen. But just as they pulled out the T-62s back in the summer to push them in the Kherson front and the Zaporizhia front, they did nothing to stop the Ukraine counteroffensive in Kherson. So you can bet that these tanks are going to be useless. In reality, they're just so outdated that they're no match to modern tanks and modern artillery. Now, the last thing I wanted to show you guys is that Zelensky made a visit close to Bakhmut. So I believe it's probably somewhere around Chasiv Yar, because at this point Bakhmut has become too dangerous for Zelensky to visit. But it shows you, again, I think, really the courage that Zelensky has. Even if it's many kilometers behind Bakhmut, it's still a very courageous act to go and visit the soldiers and pay your respect and acknowledge the hard effort and the heroism that they're doing right now to protect Ukraine. I think it's really important, especially because, it's Zelensky who's been advocating last couple of months how important Bakhmut is and how Ukraine needs to do everything possible to defend it. So it's a very important morale boost, in my opinion. Very dangerous, but it shows you the difference between the leadership from Putin and Zelensky. Whereas Putin hides in his bunkers and his palaces, where in Russia, wherever they are, because he has multiple of these palaces and mansions. Zelensky comes to the front lines and meets the heroes rather than hiding inside of bunkers and his mansions. So I think that's really important to show to you guys. Now, let's take a look at the map. Bakhmut yet again. So since my last video, you can see this was March 17th, the operational situation on March 17th. So let's look at what the Russians have gained the last couple of days. And so you can see that the gains have been very minimal and the Russians didn't push that hard. And so I think that the Institute of War, I think a day or two ago, indicated that their Wagner units are getting exhausted, depleted, and their 6-month contracts are coming to an end very soon. And so this shows why Prigozhin has been so desperate for ammunition, has been desperate to recruit more and more Wagner units, because he no longer has the manpower to be able to push further into Bakhmut and outside of Bakhmut. So yes, the Russians, as you can see, have made some small gains within Bakhmut, especially on March 20th, where they were able to push a little bit further in the north and in the south. They got some more blocks on the south of Bakhmut in the north, and also in the outskirts towards Orikhovo-Vasilivka, around this area. But overall, you can see that it's not the same pace as compared to, back in the summer, when Russia probably hit its peak when they captured Lysychansk and Severodonetsk in this area here. And so again, my opinion is that the Ukrainians are going to continue defending the city until they see that, little by little, they're going to be retreating if the Russians manage to keep pushing them further and further. So that's the tactic here until the Ukrainians are going to be able to start their counteroffensive, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, as the spring thaw ends and summer officially kicks in. The other high, very hot front that the Russians have opened as well is in Avdiivka. As you can see here, the Russians have started really pushing towards Krasnohorivka, and they're trying to create the same pocket as in Bakhmut. So the last couple of days, there haven't been much movements, but you can see that the biggest gains were around March 16th, 17th, where the Russians captured parts of Krasnohorivka, as you can see here. And so this is where the fighting is really the hottest. And Avdiivka in reality has, been leveled by the Russians, unfortunately. But, that's why the Ukrainians were defending at all costs, because they don't want the same situation to happen in Avdiivka, in Bakhmut, in Marinka. I've shared with you guys the pictures of Marinka. It's truly like a Lord of the Rings picture of, falling, an orc wave of destruction. That's what the Russians are going to continue doing in every single city, because they don't know how to do urban warfare. So for their strategy is just purely destroying cities and villages and towns, and then just storming in with their troops, following the entire destruction of cities. So that's what the Ukrainians are trying to prevent. Vuhledar, it's pretty much the same. I've already shared with you guys the catastrophic losses that the Russians have had here. They've lost multiple battalions here, and so it's pretty much been a standstill, their offensive in Vuhledar. And so I'm really expecting big news the next couple of weeks for the Ukraine counteroffensive. Now, we need to hold our expectations to realistic levels. I've seen videos, I think a couple of days ago, of somewhat a Ukrainian offensive towards Polohe, where the Ukrainian troops were testing the Russian defenses. And I've shared with you guys many months ago how much the Russians have actually built defenses in Zaporizhia, because I think this is where the Ukrainians are going to start their offensive, is somewhere around Zaporizhia, and they're very heavily defended. So the Russians have really invested a lot to create trenches, build trenches, a lot of troops to defend all of the different cities in Zaporizhia, including Tokmak, Polohe, Melitopol, and Volnovacha. And I think that it's not going to be as easy as it was back in early September, when the Ukrainians just stormed through in Kharkiv and Kherson. Right, the positions of the Russians were much weaker. Here they're much stronger. So I think that we need to keep them realistic, but I have no doubts that the Ukrainians are going to be able to really break through following many weeks of counteroffensive. But time will tell how that's going to go. But I have no doubts that the Ukrainians are going to continue fighting until the very end, until they get a victory. So that's it, guys. This is my analysis and my opinions for March 22nd, following Xi Jinping's visit to the Kremlin and the frontline updates in Ukraine. So let me know what you think. And please, if you enjoy my content, please subscribe to my channel, leave me a comment, and like the video. Thank you so much, and I will see you very soon.